The burning of the flag. When bombs fell on the ships at Pearl Harbor, we lived on a quiet dead-end street in a city not far from salt water, where palm trees, palmettos, and live oaks grew side by side in meadows that stayed green through the winter months. It was a wonderful street, lined with brick houses, each with a roofed porch, closed off at the end with a cul-de-sac and a dense canebrake, on the other side of which horses grazed in a pasture. On a rainy day, on the far side of the pasture, you could see the lighted tower of a movie theater glowing against the evening sky. My best friend was Nick Hauser. If it was a time of privation, we did not think of it as such, primarily because no one in our neighborhood had money, and most considered themselves fortunate to have survived the Depression years with their families intact. Wake Island and Corregidor fell, and we heard terrible stories about the decapitation of American prisoners. But on our block, and that is all we ever called the place we lived, our block, the era was marked not so much by a distant war as it was by the presence of radios in people's windows and on their front porches, the visits to the block of the bookmobile and the popsicle man, and games of street ball and hide-and-seek on summer evenings that smelled of flowers and water sprayed from garden hoses. One night a week during the summer of 1942, the entire city was blacked out for an air raid drill. My father sat on the front porch smoking a cigarette, a white volunteer civil defense helmet cocked on his head, sometimes reading the newspaper with a flashlight. Once the drill was over, the theater tower in the distance rippled with neon, and the voices of Fred Allen and Senator Claghorn or Fibber McGee and Molly could be heard all over the neighborhood. I believe no evil could ever enter the quiet world in which we lived. But if you crossed Westheimer Street, the soft aesthetic blend of the rural South and pre-war urban America ended dramatically. On our side of Westheimer was a watermelon stand among giant live oaks, and on the other side of the street, a neighborhood of box-like utilitarian houses and unkept yards where bitterness and penury were a way of life, and personal failure the fault of black people, Yankees, and foreigners. The kids on the opposite side of Westheimer gave no quarter in a fight and asked for none in return. Some of them carried switchblades and went nigger-knocking with BB guns and firecrackers. Their cruelty was seldom done in heat, but instead visited upon the victim dispassionately, as though the perpetrator were simply passing on an instruction about the way the world worked. The 5 Dunlop brothers were legendary in the city's school system. Each of them was a living testimony to the power of the fist or the hobnailed boot over the written word. The youngest and meanest of them was Vernon, 2 years older than Nick Hauser and me, bull-necked, his lime-green eyes wide set, his arms always pumped, his body as hard as a man's at age 14. He threw an afternoon paper route and set pins side by side with blacks at the bowling alley, and as a consequence had more money to spend than we did. But that fact did not make us safe from Vernon Dunlop. In July and August, Nick Hauser and I picked blackberries and sold them in fat quart jars door to door for 2 bits apiece. Vernon would wait for us on his bicycle behind the watermelon stand, where he knew we would come in the evening, then pelt us with clods of dried clay, never saying a word, sometimes slapping us to the ground, kneeling on one of our chests, frogging our arms and shoulders black and blue. There was neither apparent purpose nor motivation in his attacks. It was just Vernon doing what he did best, making people miserable. Then one evening he got serious. His lip was puffed and one eye swollen, his forearm streaked with red welts, his T-shirt pulled out of shape at the neck. Obviously, Vernon had just taken a licking from his father or his brothers. While Nick stood by helplessly, Vernon hit me until I cried, twisting his knuckles with each blow, driving the pain deep into the bone. Then I committed one of those cowardly acts that seems to remain inside you forever, like you give up on being you and admit your worthlessness before the world.
"I'll give you half my money. The blackberries are for everybody anyway. We should have included you in, Vernon," I said.
"Yeah, that's good of you. Let's see it," he said. He was still straddled on my chest, but he lifted one knee so I could reach into my trouser pocket. I pressed 3/4 into his palm, my eyes locked on his. I felt his weight shift on me. His buttocks and thighs clench me tighter. He cupped his palm to his mouth, spit a long string of saliva on the coins, and stuffed them inside my shirt, pressing the cloth down on them so they stuck to my skin. "I just thought of names for you guys," he said. "Nick, you're Snoff. That's the guy who gets his rocks sniffing girls' bicycle seats. Charlie, you're Frump. Don't know what a frump is? A guy who farts in the bathtub and bites the bubbles. Snoff and Frump. Perfect." He wiped his hand on my shirt as he got off my chest. I wanted to kill Vernon Dunlop. Instead, I ran home crying, the wet coin still inside my clothes, sure in some perverse fashion that Nick had betrayed me because he had not been Vernon's victim too. That evening I sat by myself at the picnic table in the backyard, throwing a screwdriver end over end into the St. Augustine grass. Our lawn was uncut, the mower propped at an odd angle in the dirt alleyway. I threw the screwdriver hard into the grass so it embedded almost to the handle in the sod. The kitchen light was on, the window open, and I could hear my parents arguing. The argument was about money, or the amount of time my father spent with his friends at the ice house and beer garden on Alabama Boulevard. I went through the side door into my bedroom and stuffed my soiled shirt and trousers into the clothes hamper. I bathed and put on my pajamas and did not tell my parents of what Vernon had done to me. I told my mother I was sick and couldn't eat. Through my screen window, I could hear the other kids playing ball in the twilight. When I woke the next morning, I felt dirty all over. My skin scalded in the places Vernon's saliva had touched it. I was convinced I was a weakling and a moral failure. The song of mockingbirds and the sunlight filtering through the mulberry tree that shaded our driveway seemed created for someone else. Nick did not come over to play, nor did he come out of his house when the popsicle man pedaled his cart down the block that afternoon. At 5 p.m., my mother sent me to the ice house to tell my father it was time for supper. He was talking with 3 other men about baseball at a plank table under a striped canopy that flapped in the wind, a bottle of Jack's and a small glass and salt shaker in front of him. He pulled out his pocket watch and looked at it. He had started his vacation that day and had been at the ice house since noon. "Is it that time already?" "Well, I bet we still have time for a root beer, don't we?" he said, and told the waiter to bring me a Hires and my father another Jack's. My father was an antithetically mixed, eccentric man who lost his best friend in the trenches on the last day of World War I. He detested war, and particularly the demagogues who championed it, but had never participated in one themselves. He flew the flag on our front porch, unfurling it from its staff each morning, putting it away in the hall closet at sunset. He taught me how to fold the flag in a tucked square, and told me it should never touch the ground or be left in the rain or flown after it had become sun-faded or frayed by the wind. But he attended no veterans' functions, nor would he discuss the current war in front of me or let me look at the photographs of enemy dead that sometimes appeared in Life magazine. My father had wanted to be a journalist, but he had left college without completing his degree and had gone to work for a natural gas pipeline company. After the crash of 29, any hope of his changing careers was over. He never complained about the work he did, but each day he came home from the job and repeatedly washed his hands, as though he was scrubbing an irremovable stain from fabric. As we walked home from the ice house, I asked him if we could go fishing down at Galveston. "Sure. You want to ask Nick?" he said.
"I don't hang around with Nick anymore," I replied.
"You boys have a fight?"
"No," I replied. Then I felt my mouth flex, waiting for the words to come out that would explain how I let Vernon rub his spit on me and call me frump, how I gave him half my money just so he would climb off my chest, how I could still feel his scrotum and buttocks pressing against my body. But I crimped my lips and looked at the cars passing on the street, gas ration stickers glued to their front windows. The light on the trees and lawns and cars seemed to shimmer and break apart.
"You all right, son? You having trouble with the other kids on the block or something?" my father said.
"There's a new kid on the next street from Chicago. He thinks he's better than everybody else. Why doesn't he go back where he came from?" I said.
Hey, my father said, patting me on the back. "Don't talk about a chum like that. He can't help where he's from. No more of that now, okay?"
"Are we going fishing?"
"We'll see. Your mother has a bunch of things for me to do. Let's take one thing at a time here," my father said. My parents had a fight that night, and my father and I did not go to Galveston in the morning. In fact, I didn't know where my father went. He was gone for 2 days. Then he came home, unpacked a suitcase, read the newspaper on the front porch, and walked down to the ice house. I started to have trouble at school that fall. I had thought of myself as a favorite of the nuns, but on my first 6-week report card for the term, the gold stars I had previously received for attitude and conduct were replaced by green and red ones. To combat wartime scarcity of paper, Sister Agnes examined the big chief notebooks of everyone in class. Those who wasted any paper at all were classified as Germans. Those who wasted egregiously were classified as Japs. I was designated a Jap. Later that same day, I pushed the boy from Chicago down on the ground and called him a Yankee and a yellow-belly. In January, the weather turned cold, streaked with rain and smoke from trash fires. The kids in the neighborhood constructed forts from discarded Christmas trees in the pasture at the end of the block, stacking them in front of pits they had dug to make mud balls that they launched with elaborate slingshots they had fashioned from bicycle inner tubes. But I took no part in the fun. I read the Hardy Boys series I checked out from the bookmobile, and listened to Terry and the Pirates, Captain Midnight, and Jack Armstrong, the All-American Boy, in the afternoons. Then my mother brought home a box of Wheaties that contained a picture of a flying fortress and a coupon which, when filled out and returned to the cereal company, would entitle the sender to have his name placed on a scroll inside the fuselage of a United States Air Corps bomber. My father saw me printing my name on the coupon at the dining room table. "You sending off for another Dakota badge?" he asked. I explained how my name would be inside a plane that was bombing the Nazis and the Japanese off the map. "Not a good idea, Charlie. Where'd you get that?" he said.
"Mom brought it home."
"I see," he said. He cracked open a beer in the kitchen and sat down at the table. His package of Lucky Strike cigarettes had a red dot on it, with a green circle around the dot. "Innocent people are dying under those bombs, Charlie. It's not a game," he said.
"I didn't say it was," I replied.
He caught the resentment in my tone and looked at me strangely. "Saw the Christmas tree forts you boys were building," he said.
"Nick and the others are doing that."
"What's going on, son?"
"They don't like me."
"I don't believe that. Tell you what, does Nick have a flag for his fort?"
"Flag?"
My father rubbed the top of my head and winked.
Saturday morning, he and I walked down to the end of the block and cut through the canebrake into the pasture.
It was a fine morning, crisp and sunny, the live oaks by Westheimer puffing with wind. Kids were hunkered down behind their barricades of stacked Christmas trees, lobbing mud balls at one another. A star-spangled kite that a kid had tied to one fort popping against a cloudless blue sky. The exchange of mud balls stopped when the kids saw my father. Nick came out from behind his fort and looked at us, his faded clothes daubed with dirt, his face hot from play. "Got room for one more?" my father asked. "Sure, Mr. Rourke," Nick replied. His eyes didn't meet my father's, and for the first time I realized Nick had been injured by Vernon Dunlop in ways I had not understood. "Do you fellas want to fly this over your fort?" my father asked, unfurling our flag from its staff. "That'd be great," Nick said. "But you've got to take care of it. Don't let it get stained or dirty. Make sure you take it inside when you're done," my father said. While my father walked back home, Nick and I raised the flag on our ramparts, loaded our slingshots with hard-packed mud balls, and opened fire on the enemy. For just a moment, out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw Vernon Dunlop watching us from the grove of oak trees, his muscular thighs forked across the frame of his bicycle. Nick's father was a decent, religious, blue-collar man who built a clubhouse for us in one of the live oak trees on Westheimer, and sometimes walked us to the Alabama Theater on Friday night. The family did not own a car, and Nick's father rode the city bus to his job as a supervisor at a laundry on the north side of downtown. He had been a Golden Gloves boxer as a teenager in Mobile, and he owned a set of 16-ounce boxing gloves that he used in teaching Nick and the other kids to box. But he was a strict disciplinarian and admonished his children to never bring home a mark on their bodies that God didn't put there. When he took out his razor strop, Nick's scalp would literally recede on his head, as though it had been exposed to a naked flame. At the end of the first afternoon we had flown the flag at the fort, Nick rolled the flag on its staff and handed it to me. "My dad wants you to keep it at your house," I said. "Is your dad mad at me?" Nick asked. His dark hair was buzz-cut, his skin still brown from summer, his face round, his cheeks pooled with color. There were dirt rings on his neck, and I could smell the heat and dampness in his clothes from playing all day. "Why would my dad be mad at you?" "I didn't help you when Vernon rubbed his spit on you." I felt my eyes film at the image he had used. "I didn't tell my dad anything," I said. "When I get bigger, I'm going to break Vernon's nose. He's not so tough with big guys," he said. But Vernon was tough with big guys. We found that out next week when Nick and I started our first afternoon paper route together. The paper corner where the bundles were dropped for the carriers was across Westheimer. Not only was it a block from Vernon's house, it was the same corner where Vernon and his brothers rolled the papers for their route. I couldn't believe our bad luck. We sat on the pavement, our legs splayed, rolling our papers into cylinders, whipping mouth-wet string around them to cinch them tight, while Vernon did the same 3 feet from us. A jalopy packed with North Side kids, the top cut away with an acetylene torch, ran the stop sign, all of them shooting the bone at everyone on the corner. They parked by the drugstore and went inside, lighting cigarettes, running combs through their ducktails, squeezing their scrotums. Vernon got on his bicycle, one with no tire guards and a wood rack for his canvas saddlebags, and rode down to the drugstore. He calmly parked his bike on its kickstand, flicked open his switchblade, and sliced off the valve stems on all 4 of the jalopy's tires. 10 minutes later, when the jalopy's occupants came out of the drugstore, Vernon was back on the corner, rolling his papers. They stared at their tires, unable to believe what they were seeing. So they would make no mistake about who had done the damage to them, Vernon stood up, shot them the bone with both hands, followed by the Italian salute and the eat shit horns of the cuckold sign. Then he bent over and mooned them and shot them the bone again, this time between his legs. He took a tire iron from his saddlebags and clanged it on a fire plug until the Northsiders got back in their jalopy, and drove it on the rims out of the neighborhood. For a moment, I almost felt Vernon was our ally. He disabused us of that notion by hanging Nick's bicycle on a telephone spike, 15 feet above the street. That spring, Nick and I collected old newspapers, coat hangers, tin foil, and discarded rubber tires for the war effort, and hauled them down to the collection center at the fire station. We used baling wire to attach the staff of our flag to the wooden slats on the side of Nick's wagon, and worked our way up and down alleys throughout the neighborhood, the wagon creaking under the load of junk stacked inside it, confident that in some fashion we were fighting the forces of evil that had bombed Pearl Harbor, Warsaw, and Coventry. At the outset of the war, families in our neighborhood had hung small service flags in their windows, blue stars on a white field inside a rectangle of blue and red, indicating the number of men and women from that home who had gone to war. Now, in the spring of '43, some of the blue stars had been replaced by gold ones. The Sweeney boy from across the street parachuted into Europe, and eventually would be one of the soldiers who captured Hitler's fortified chalet at Berchtesgaden. My cousin Weldon gave up his ROTC deferment at Texas A&M and came home with the Silver Star, 3 Purple Hearts, and 1 lung. Nick and I began to collect meat drippings from people's kitchens and take them to the local butcher, who supposedly shipped them in large barrels to a munitions factory, where they were made into nitroglycerin. Everyone in the neighborhood knew us by the flag on our wagon. My father's friends at the ice house bought us cold drinks. Nick and I glowed with pride. "Y'all think your shit don't stink?" Vernon said to us one day on the paper corner. Nick and I buried our faces in our work, rolling the top newspapers on the stack, whipping string around them, pitching them heavily into the saddlebags on our bikes. Vernon grabbed my wrist, stopping me in mid-roll. "Which one are you, Frump or Snarf?" he asked. "I'm Frump," I said. "Then answer my question, Frump." "My shit stinks, Vernon," I said. "You wise ass," Vernon said. "Why don't you leave him alone?" Nick said. "What'd you say?" Vernon asked. The only sounds on the corner were the wind in the trees and a milk truck rattling down the street. "Your brothers went to the pen. That's why they're not in the army. Charlie's cousin won the Silver Star. I heard your sister dozed the yard man," Nick said. I could hear the words "no, no, no" like a drumbeat in my head. "Tell me, Snarf, did you know Hauser is a kraut name?" Vernon said. "My dad says it's a lot better than being white trash," Nick said. Vernon lit a cigarette and puffed on it thoughtfully, then flicked the hot match into Nick's eye. After we threw the route, I put my bike away in the garage and walked unexpectedly through the back door of the house into the kitchen, where my mother and father were fighting. They both looked at me blankly, like people in whose faces a flashbulb has just popped. "Why y'all gotta fight all the time?" I said. "You mustn't talk like that. We were just having a discussion," my mother said. There was baking flour on her hands and arms and a smudge of it on her cheek. I went back outside and threw rocks at the cane brake at the end of the street and did not go home for supper. At sunset, Nick and I sat in the treehouse we had built on the edge of Westheimer and watched the electric lights come on in the oak grove where the watermelon stand was. Vernon's father, with 2 of his older sons, crossed the street and sat down at one of the tables, a cigar between his fingers, his bald head faintly iridescent, like an alabaster bowling ball. The smoke from his cigar drifted onto another table, causing a family to move. His sons cut in line by pretending they were with a friend and brought chunks of melon as red as freshly sliced meat back to the table. The 3 of them began eating,
spitting their seeds into the grass. "I hope the Dunlops go to hell," I said. "Sister Agnes says that's a mortal sin," Nick replied. Then he grinned. The burn on his face looked like a tiny yellow bug under his eye. "Maybe they'll just go to purgatory and never get out." "You stood up for me and I didn't try to help you," I said. "It wouldn't have done any good. Vernon can whip both of us." "You were brave. You're a lot braver than me," I said. "Who cares about Vernon Dunlop? I got a dime. Let's get a cold drink at the filling station," Nick said. Through the slats of the treehouse, I could see the Dunlops slurping down their watermelon. "I don't feel too good. I don't feel good about anything," I said. "Don't be like that, Charlie. We'll always be pals," Nick said. I climbed down the tree trunk and dropped into the tannic smell of leaves that had turned black with the spring rains and that broke with the wet snapping sound under my feet. Out in the darkness I heard horses blowing, and I could see lightning flicker like veins of quicksilver in a bank of storm heads over the Gulf of Mexico. But the nocturnal softness of the season had no influence on my heart, and a few minutes later I knew that was the way things would go from there on out. When I got home, my father was gone. That night I slept with my pillow crimped down tightly on my head. Early Saturday morning, Nick knocked on my screen window. He was barefoot and wore short pants, and his face looked unwashed and full of sleep. "What is it?" I whispered. "The flag. It's gone," he replied. "Gone? I left it on the wagon. I forgot to take it in last night," he said. We stared through the screen into each other's faces. "Vernon?" I said. "Who else?" Nick replied. I spent the entire day locked inside my own head, my throat constricted with fear at the prospect of confronting Vernon Dunlop. My father had not returned home, and I went to the ice house to see if I could find him. His friends were kindly toward me, and when they sat me down and brought me a cold drink and a hot dog, I knew they possessed knowledge about my life that I didn't. I tried to convince myself that someone other than Vernon had stolen the flag. Maybe it had been one of the colored yardmen who worked in the neighborhood, or the Cantonese kids whose parents ran a small grocery up on Westheimer. Maybe I had been unfair to Vernon. Why blame him for every misdeed in the neighborhood? At dusk, I rode my bike down his street, my heart in my throat, as though at any moment he would burst from the quiet confines of his frame house, one that was painted the same shade of yellow as the buildings in the Southern Pacific freight yards. A dead pecan tree stood in the front yard, the rotted gray ropes of his swing with no seat lifting in the breeze. Inside the house, someone was listening to gangbusters, police sirens and staccato bursts of machine gun fire erupting behind the announcer's voice. But no American flag flew from the Dunlop's house. I made a turn at the end of the block and headed back home on a street parallel to Vernon's, temporarily triumphant over my fears. Then, through a space between two dilapidated garages, I saw our flag and staff nailed at a 45-degree angle to a post on the Dunlop's back porch. I pedaled straight ahead, my eyes fixed on the intersection, my face stinging as though it had been slapped. I wanted to find Nick or go look for my father again, or to get hit by a car or do anything that would remove me from what I knew I had to do next. The sun was a molten ball now, buried inside a strip of purple cloud, the sky freckled with birds. I turned my bike around and rode back down the alleyway to the Dunlop's house, through lines of garbage cans, my heart hammering in my ears. Then a peculiar event happened inside me, like the stories I had heard on the radio of a soldier going over a parapet into Japanese machine gun fire or an aviator with no parachute leaping from his burning plane. I surrendered myself to my fate and crossed the Dunlop's yard to their back porch. With my hands shaking, I pried the flagstaff from the wood post, the nail wrenching free as loudly as a rusted hinge, and walked quickly between the Dunlop's garage and the neighbors to my bicycle, rolling the flag on its staff, confident I had rescued the flag intact. I stuffed it in one of my saddlebags and kicked my bike stand back into place. Just as I did, I saw Mr. Dunlop shove Vernon from the back door of the house into the yard. Mr. Dunlop wore a strap undershirt and blue serge pants, and he had a dog chain doubled around his fist. He whipped his son with it 4 times across the back, then threw him to the ground. "You stole money out of a nigger's house? Don't lie, I'll take the hide off you for real," Mr. Dunlop said. "Yes, Daddy," Vernon replied, weeping, his face powdered with dust. I thought his father was going to hit Vernon again, but he didn't. "Folks is gonna say we're so hard up you got to steal from niggers. What we gonna do with you, son?" he said. Then he sat down on the step and stroked Vernon's head as though he were petting a dog. "What are you looking at?" he said to me. I crossed Westheimer and pushed my bike through the oak grove by the watermelon stand and followed the path through the canebrake to Nick's house. I knocked on the door, then unfurled the flag as I waited. My heart dropped when I saw the streaks of grease and dirt and pin-like separations across one side of the cloth, printed there, I suspected, by the chain or spokes of Vernon's bicycle. But he had hung it from his porch anyway, like a scalp rather than the symbol of his country. Nick opened the screen door and stepped outside. "Wow, you got it back. You slam old Vernon upside the head with a brick or something?" he said. "It's ruined," I replied. Nick placed his hand on the bottom side of the cloth. The pinkness of his palm showed through the separations in the thread. "What are we going to do?" he said. My father had taught me not only how to care for the flag, but also how to dispose of it if it was soiled or damaged. That night, Nick and I conducted a private ceremony under our treehouse. We built a fire of grass and decayed oak limbs and spread our stained flag on top of the flames. We stood at attention like toy soldiers and saluted the thick curds of smoke and black threads of cloth that rose out of the heat, some of them sparking like fireflies among the oaks where people were still eating watermelon. Someone called the fire department, and the owner of the watermelon stand told us he would have our treehouse torn down. Almost simultaneously, Mr. Dunlop and his son showed up, enraged that I had stolen and destroyed their flag. It was a year of Allied naval victories in the Pacific, rationing about which no one complained, and Tommy Dorsey and Glenn Miller on the jukebox. It was the year in which a group of good-natured firemen and the Dunlop family and the patrons of a watermelon stand stood in a circle around 2 small boys, like creatures whose exteriors were made of tallow, warping in the firelight, exposing for good or bad the child that lives in us all. It was 1943, the year my father died in a duck-hunting accident down at Anahuac, and the year Nick Hauser and I beat the world and never told anybody about it.